The evening air in Los Angeles carried the familiar scent of jasmine and exhaust fumes as the city settled into its nightly rhythm. High up in the Hollywood Hills, Lumiere restaurant glowed like a beacon against the darkening sky. Its floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the sprawling metropolis below, while inside, the atmosphere was one of quiet sophistication, soft jazz floating through the air, candlelight dancing on crystal glasses, and the gentle murmur of conversations between the city's elite. Leonardo DiCaprio sat alone at his usual corner table, the one that afforded him both privacy and the best view. He'd chosen a simple dark blazer over a white shirt, his trademark casual elegance that never seemed forced. The day had been exhausting, back-to-back meetings about his latest environmental initiative, followed by a lengthy discussion with producers about his next film project. All he wanted now was solitude, a decent meal, and perhaps a glass of the restaurant's finest Bordeaux. The waiter, Marcus, had been serving him for years and knew to give him space. The other diners recognized him, of course, but respected his desire for privacy. This was why Leo frequented Lumiere. It was a sanctuary where celebrities could dine without being constantly approached for selfies or autographs. The restaurant's heavy oak doors suddenly swung open, letting in a gust of cool evening air that made the candles flicker. Everyone looked up from their conversations, expecting another well-dressed patron, but instead, a small figure stepped hesitantly into the warm glow of the dining room. She couldn't have been more than 12 years old, with platinum blonde hair that caught the light like spun gold. Her clothes told a story of careful maintenance despite obvious wear, a thin denim jacket that had seen better days, patched jeans, and sneakers that had been cleaned but couldn't hide their age. In her small hands, she clutched a portable speaker, the kind sold at electronics stores for $20. Her backpack, though clean, bore the subtle signs of heavy use. The child stood near the entrance, her green eyes scanning the room with a mixture of determination and nervous energy. The restaurant fell into an uncomfortable silence, the kind that accompanies an unexpected disruption of the established order. "Excuse me," she said, her voice clear despite its slight tremor. "I'm sorry to bother you, but would it be okay if I sang one song for you? I'm trying to raise money to help my mom buy her medicine." The words hung in the air like a challenge to the comfortable bubble of wealth and privilege that surrounded the diners. Some looked away, uncomfortable with the intrusion of real-world problems into their evening escape. Others smiled with patronizing sympathy, the kind reserved for situations they'd rather not acknowledge. Marcus, the head waiter, appeared at her side with the swift efficiency of someone trained to handle disruptions. His expression was professional but firm, the kind perfected by years of maintaining the restaurant's exclusive atmosphere. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," he said, his tone suggesting anything but endearment, "but you can't be here. This is a private establishment. You need to leave, please." The girl's shoulders sagged slightly, but she didn't move immediately. Her fingers tightened around the speaker's handle, and for a moment, it seemed like she might argue. Instead, she simply nodded, the gesture carrying a weight of disappointment that seemed too heavy for someone her age to bear. She turned toward the door, her footsteps silent on the polished marble floor. The restaurant's patrons began to return to their conversations, the uncomfortable moment already fading from their collective consciousness. "Wait." The single word cut through the returning chatter like a blade. Every head turned toward the corner table where Leonardo DiCaprio was rising from his chair. He moved with deliberate slowness, his blue eyes fixed on the waiter with an intensity that made Marcus shift uncomfortably. "She's not bothering anyone," Leo said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "She wants to sing, not steal. If that's a problem, then the problem isn't with her." Marcus straightened, his professional demeanor intact despite the obvious discomfort. "Mr. DiCaprio, I understand your concern, but we have establishment policies." "I know the owner," Leo interrupted smoothly. "Perhaps you could get the manager for me." The request was phrased politely, but it carried the unmistakable weight of consequence. Marcus hesitated, caught between his duty to maintain order and the reality of challenging one of the restaurant's most valued customers. After a moment that felt much longer than it was, he nodded and disappeared into the back of the restaurant. During the wait, Leo approached the girl, who had stopped her retreat and was watching the exchange with wide eyes. Up close, he could see the careful way she held herself, the pride that kept her chin raised despite her obvious nervousness. There was something familiar about her determination. It reminded him of his own childhood, when he would perform in community theater despite having little money for proper costumes or equipment. He noticed the small details that spoke of a life lived carefully. Her jacket was patched at the elbow with fabric that almost matched, her shoes were clean but the soles were worn thin, and her backpack bore the faded logo of a school that had closed down years ago due to budget cuts. Yet despite these signs of hardship, she carried herself with dignity, her posture straight and her eyes bright with intelligence. "What's your name?" he asked gently, crouching down slightly so they were at eye level. "Emma," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper, but Leo caught the slight accent, perhaps Irish or Scottish, that hinted at family heritage. "That's a beautiful name. And you like to sing?" He could see her speaker was well used but carefully maintained, wrapped in what looked like homemade protective padding. She nodded eagerly, some of her nervousness giving way to enthusiasm. "I've been singing since I was little. My mom says I have a gift, but..." Her voice trailed off, and she looked down at her worn sneakers. "But what?" "But gifts don't pay for medicine," she finished quietly. Before Leo could respond, the manager appeared, a tall, thin man named Richard who Leo had dealt with on several occasions. Richard's expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes betrayed his anxiety at being summoned to handle what was clearly a delicate situation. "Mr. DiCaprio," Richard said, extending his hand with practiced professionalism. "How can I help you this evening?" Leo didn't take the offered hand. Instead, he gestured toward Emma. "This young lady would like to perform a song. I don't see why that should be a problem." Richard's smile became strained. "Sir, I'm sure you understand that we have to maintain certain standards." "Standards?" Leo's eyebrows raised slightly. "What standards exactly? The standard that says a child can't share her talent? The standard that says we're too important to spare 5 minutes for someone who's trying to help her sick mother?" The manager's face flushed slightly. Around them, the other diners had given up any pretense of not listening. Conversations had died completely, and all attention was focused on the quiet confrontation unfolding near the entrance. "It's not that simple," Richard protested. "If we allow one person to perform, then..." "Then what?" Leo's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the surface. "Then this place might actually have some heart. Listen to me very carefully, Richard. This child wants to sing one song. If that somehow violates your precious standards, then I'm no longer your customer. And I doubt I'll be the only one." The threat was delivered quietly, without dramatics, but its impact was unmistakable. Richard's eyes darted around the room, taking in the faces of the other diners. Several were nodding in agreement with Leo's words, while others looked uncomfortable with the confrontation but clearly sympathetic to the girl. After what felt like an eternity, Richard sighed and nodded reluctantly. "Of course, Mr. DiCaprio. We'd be happy to accommodate the young lady." Emma's face lit up with a smile that transformed her entire appearance. The nervousness and sadness melted away, replaced by an excitement that was infectious. She carefully set her speaker on a nearby table and pressed a button, filling the restaurant with the soft opening notes of "Amazing Grace." What happened next would stay with everyone present for the rest of their lives. Emma closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath as if gathering strength from somewhere deep within. When she opened them again, there was a transformation. The nervous child had become an artist, connected to something larger than herself. She pressed play on her speaker, and the gentle opening notes of "Amazing Grace" filled the air. Her voice rose clear and pure, carrying with it an emotional depth that seemed impossible for someone her age. But this wasn't just technical skill, there was lived experience in her tone, the weight of sleepless nights spent worried about her mother, the burden of responsibility that no child should have to bear. She wasn't just singing the familiar hymn, she was pouring her heart into every note, every word. As she sang, "Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound, that saved a wretch like me," her voice cracked slightly on the word, saved, and in that imperfection lay the most perfect expression of human longing. The song spoke of hope and redemption, of grace in the darkest moments, and as she sang, it became clear that she wasn't just performing, she was sharing a piece of her soul, offering her pain and hope as a gift to everyone listening. The restaurant fell completely silent except for her voice. Waiters stopped mid-step, wine glasses remained frozen halfway to lips, and conversations died on tongues. This wasn't just a talented child singing, this was something transcendent, something that reached past the barriers of class and circumstance to touch the fundamental humanity in everyone present. As the song reached its crescendo, Emma's eyes found Leo's, and in that moment, there was a connection that transcended words. He saw in her the same passion he felt for his craft, the same determination to use talent in service of something greater than oneself. She saw in him an ally, someone who understood that art wasn't just entertainment, it was a bridge between souls. When the final note faded away, the silence stretched for several heartbeats. In that profound quiet, something extraordinary happened. An elderly woman at a corner table, Mrs. Eleanor Whitman, a renowned philanthropist, wiped tears from her cheeks with her silk napkin. She had heard countless performances at the opera house, but nothing had moved her quite like this child's raw, honest voice. A young couple on their anniversary date found themselves holding hands tighter, remembering why they had fallen in love in the first place. The song had reminded them that beauty could emerge from struggle, that hope could flourish even in the darkest circumstances. Even the kitchen staff had quietly gathered near the service doors, drawn by the ethereal voice that seemed to transform the very air of the restaurant. Chef Antoine, a stern man who rarely showed emotion, stood with his hand over his heart, thinking of his own daughter back in France whom he hadn't seen in 2 years. Then, starting with Leo, applause began to ripple through the restaurant. But this wasn't the polite, obligatory clapping of a dinner show. This was genuine appreciation, the kind reserved for moments that touch something deep inside. The sound built and built, echoing off the high ceilings and windows, creating a crescendo of human appreciation that seemed to envelope Emma like a warm embrace. Emma's eyes filled with tears as the applause continued, but they were tears of joy rather than sadness. She had done what she came to do, she had shared her gift, and it had been received with the respect it deserved. For the first time in months, she felt something other than worry about her mother, she felt the pure joy of connection through music. Leo approached her as the applause began to fade, pulling out his wallet. Without fanfare, he placed several $100 bills in the small collection box she had set beside her speaker. "That was extraordinary," he told her quietly. "Your mother must be very proud." "She is," Emma replied, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "She taught me that song. She used to sing it to me when I was scared." "Is she very sick?" Leo asked gently. Emma nodded, her composure wavering slightly. "The doctors say she needs special medicine, but insurance won't pay for it. It costs $3,000 every month." Leo's heart clenched at the matter-of-fact way she stated the impossible sum. $3,000, what some people in this restaurant spent on a single evening out, was the difference between hope and despair for this child and her mother. "What's your mother's name?" he asked. "Sarah. Sarah Mitchell." Leo nodded, filing the information away. Then he turned to Richard, who had been watching the exchange with growing amazement. "Richard, I'd like you to prepare a meal for Emma. Whatever she'd like, on my tab. And while you're doing that, give her this." He handed the manager a business card. "Tell her to call this number tomorrow and mention my name." The card belonged to Michael Chen, a music producer Leo had worked with on several projects. More importantly, Michael ran a non-profit organization that identified and supported young musical talent from underprivileged backgrounds. Leo had helped fund the organization for years, but had never had the opportunity to personally refer someone to their programs. As Richard bustled away to arrange Emma's meal, other diners began approaching. What had started as Leo's solitary gesture of kindness became a groundswell of generosity. Money appeared in Emma's collection box, not just spare change, but significant contributions. A talent agent left her card, as did a music teacher who offered free lessons. A doctor who specialized in the kind of condition Emma's mother likely had wrote down his contact information, mentioning that he often worked with patients who needed financial assistance. Emma sat at a small table near the window, overwhelmed by the sudden outpouring of support. As she ate the meal Richard had provided, a simple pasta dish she had chosen because it reminded her of what her mother used to make when she was feeling well, she kept looking around in amazement at the kindness of strangers. Leo returned to his own table but found it impossible to concentrate on his meal. Instead, he watched Emma interact with the various people who continued to approach her. She handled each conversation with a maturity beyond her years, gracefully accepting help while maintaining her dignity. When it was time for Emma to leave, Leo walked her to the door. The collection box was heavy now, weighted down with enough money to cover at least 2 months of her mother's medication. But more than that, she carried with her a stack of business cards and phone numbers, connections that could change the trajectory of her life. "Thank you," she told Leo as they stood by the restaurant's entrance. "Not just for the money, but for making them listen." "You made them listen," Leo corrected. "I just made sure you got the chance. That voice of yours, that's your power. Don't ever let anyone tell you it doesn't matter." Emma nodded solemnly, then surprised him by reaching up to hug him briefly. "I'll never forget this," she whispered. As Leo watched her disappear into the Los Angeles night, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense that he had witnessed something truly meaningful. Not the manufactured meaning of Hollywood productions or charity galas, but the raw, authentic moment when one human being's need met another's capacity to help. 6 months later, Leo was driving through the same neighborhood when he heard a familiar voice on the radio. The DJ was introducing a new single by an up-and-coming young artist who had been discovered at a restaurant in the Hollywood Hills. As Emma's voice filled his car, now backed by professional production but still carrying that same pure, emotional clarity, Leo smiled and turned up the volume. The song was called "Amazing Grace, Mama's Song," and it was climbing the charts with unprecedented speed. But more importantly, the proceeds from its sales were funding a new foundation that provided medication assistance to families in need. Emma's voice had become not just entertainment, but a force for change. That evening, Leo received a handwritten letter delivered to his publicist's office. It was from Emma, thanking him once again and sharing the news that her mother's health had stabilized thanks to the medication they could now afford. But the letter's most important message was its closing line: "You taught me that using your voice for others is the most important performance of all." Leo kept that letter on his desk, a reminder that sometimes the most significant moments in life happen not on movie sets or red carpets, but in the quiet spaces where one person's courage meets another's compassion. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, those moments come wrapped in the voice of a 12-year-old girl who understood that true grace comes not from what you receive, but from what you're willing to give. Thank you for watching. I hope you all enjoy this video and learned a lesson. I would be grateful for your likes. Also don't forget to subscribe and comment on the video. See you soon.